Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hope you're all well. Thank you for the energies for having us today. We are grateful for all of you for sharing this possibility that we have for FIMI to have this conversation, to talk about our rights, to talk about what we can do as women and how we can recover, strengthening, and doing more emphasis on that power that we have as women to be able to transform. And because sometimes women they don't want to speak for us, so we need to be able to speak for our own rights, and it's something that we share, that we think about, and that today we can take advantage of it. We'll have other spaces to be able to share, but welcome everyone to this space that we have for you today. We'll leave the space for our invocation, to have this space to talk about transform, and let's live in that space right now. Welcome everyone. Who who was going to do the invocation for today? Who's going to start the day off today? Is she not here yet? Who was volunteering for starting today's session? I don't know if I'm confusing the person, but hello, does everybody hear me? Yes, we can. Is she not here yet? No, she's not. No, she did it last time. Or somebody else might want to join in and do the start of the day. Can somebody start the day for us, please? Any volunteers? Today is our last session with Miss Sarah, so please, any volunteers? If nobody can, let's all touch our hearts, please. Let's touch our hearts. Hands on your heart. Can you feel your heart? Can you feel your heartbeat? So we're gonna breathe in. Let's breathe in. Nice and control. Breathe out through your mouth. We thank for the possibility to be present today, to be together with all of us, but also to have the people that surround us in our homes. Let's breathe in. Inhale, please, through your nose. Now, with our left hand, we're going to grab our right hand, our right arm. Okay. With your left hand, you're going to grab your right arm, and let's hold ourselves as women. This is an embrace that we call an embrace to ourselves because we are feeling our hearts, but we're also hugging ourselves. We want to hug our life. We want to hug our power. We want to embrace our strength. And we want to embrace all our lineage, our parents' lineage, our mother's lineage of our territory. Now, very slowly, let's release. And we're going to thank this energy that we have today. Let's thank for the breathing of our hearts. Let's thank because today we are all here in this space, sharing our space, sharing this with other women. We're going to thank that we have been surrounded by people that we love and we care for and who are alive, thanks to God. We're going to breathe in 3 times and very slowly we're going to release that. So deep breath, go 1, in through your nose and exhale through your mouth. We go to inhale through our nose, 2nd time, and exhale through your mouth. Last time, let's go, breathe in through your nose, exhale through your mouth. Very slowly, we can open our eyes. All right, thank you very much. Thank you for being in the present. Thank you for being in the now. Good morning to everyone. So we're going to start today with our session. And we're going to start by going over through what we did from last week. How we were speaking about, what we were talking about. What do you remember from last session? Is there a gap that you feel that needs to be talking about again to begin our session? So let's do a little remembering of what we did, what we talked about. Does somebody want to talk about what we did last week? What was our last session about? What do you think of our last session? What did we speak about? I want to mention something. Our last session, I thought that it was a very interesting topic. Talking about your 39, we talk about the recommendations that are made to look over the Indigenous women's rights. And it's important to see all these rights being looked at. I had one doubt though. Um, and my question is, how can one make a recommendation as a civil society? Do you have to be part of a committee, or what's the process looks like for us to make a recommendation? So if somebody from a department can make a recommendation for the 039s, or what's the process like? to prepare to make a recommendation. Thank you. To make a recommendation, you need, well, there's two criteria to do this. The first one is regularly when you make propose a recommendation, a general recommendation is a member of the committee, which comes from the needs that she observed over a period of time from the reports that are being presented to them. And if they see that there is a need, a common need, or that is very frequent, or attention that needs to be looked at, then they can make a general recommendation. Or that's like a need specific to a state, and the general committee member sees this, and they talk it internally. And based on that, they go follow up, and that's how it starts. The one that's never happened, but the based off year 39, it started to happen, is that from a civil society standpoint, you can propose a recommendation. And how is it made is that we'll have a guest later on from who were these organizations who began this from civil society. You can always, as long as an international plane. So if you're from Cauca, for example, you're trying to propose something that is not just left there, so that it can go to other territories, so they can reach other countries, and it can be a general recommendation. What the H-pop community collective was doing is that they were proposing in various spaces until finally they were able to be listened to what they were listening to, what they were proposing, what they were talking about in those spaces. And the more women speak about that need, the more there's a concern to be looked at. Other strategies that we saw was from the H-pop collective was they got a member on their, so it was Gladys Acosta, the member of Cedaw, but you have the Julina Barrero, who was also a member of the collective, with whom they were able to speak to, and she could also be the channel within the Cedaw committee. So that's the pathway to be able, and this was then that we had this that opportunity from civil society, but it was a very important exercise because it is possible. It shows us that it can be possible from a civil society standpoint to propose a recommendation, and not necessarily from the states that are party of the members, because that's when they are presenting different reports, and based on the reporting, you see where's the need, and then from now the Cedaw committee can take decisions. So our guest today from HPOP is gonna we're gonna ask her again about that process and what worked, what didn't work, what were the difficulties that they found, and share with you that this initiative began from 2013, and 2022 was finally when it was finally approved. So it means 10 years almost in that discussion to have to happen. When we make our own our own initiatives, they can take a lot of time, and because we lack the resources or the capacities to be able to reach other continents, other spaces, which could also give us a more strengthened to our purposes. So hopefully that will answer your question. Will Jesse wants to talk to? Get another question, Jesse, or a comment? Good morning, everyone. It's just a comment from what I remember from our last session. I remember we talked about there were different recommendations issued, and I remember that there's recommendations where rethink or broaden in version of the reality that we're living in the moment. And this is very important because our society is constantly changing and presenting different challenges and issues. And from there, that there's a need to be able to rethink certain ideas and improving these recommendations. We talk about GR 39, and it called my attention that it talk about the women and indigenous women and girls, and it talks about the right to pro justice, the right to work, to have to society, to health, to talk about sovereignty. So it's more broad, it's very specific to indigenous women, but also when we are analyzing, we can always find spaces where we can add something else to it. And I really like the exercise that we did in teams where we're reflecting on how much do we know about it before this course, and we were looking at as a team that the importance of knowing these tools and bring her to our communities, bring us to our surroundings, and create awareness, because sometimes these mechanisms are very important for our own towns, but also many people that lack the knowledge of it, and we need to take ownership on it to be able to bring it to our environments and create an impact. Thank you. Yes, yes, definitely. Our governments have this awareness, conscience of bringing these tools to our own towns. The less we know about our rights, the less we have the tools to defend ourselves. It's easier for the governments. So we have a lot of challenges in that area, in knowing in and have that replication with our surroundings. We still have a lot of gaps there. We have 39, and this means that there are many topics that are still lacking, and we need to be able to bring them to the table and make them a reality. So, especially because with this year 39, we need to consider uh, a more broadened cosmo cosmo vision of our indigenous origins, which are not reflected in other documents from our own scope. So it's important to reserve that because it does speak about indigenous women. It has many gaps, especially, and we have some progress made, but we still need to keep working on those gaps. Any other comments from anyone else? Good morning. I wanted to ask if it's this recommendation that I was done every certain period of time, if we have a relationship or direct incidents in that recommendation at a specific moment, or how can we, from our own territories in our countries, create that link with where we can make those recommendations? Because I feel that we have to have, if we need to belong to an organization to be able to be heard and have incidents, but how can we find people from the community and create that link to be able to start a conversation about? All right, Samai, thank you very much. I feel that right now there's possibilities because of internet to start looking for the members of the Cedaw, and then you have a list of who are the 23 members of the committee, but also you can also go to the United Nations website, and there we'll see a tab where we talk about the main conventions, and within that document, within that tab, that's where we have um, the one for Cedaw. And when we click that tab for Cedaw, we'll see in what date is their country report supposed to send the reports. And based on that, we can see who are the members of the committee, and we can observe with the reports. Some reports that have been generated by the committee for some countries. There's two ways on how the committee can make observations or how they can broaden their, which is set out. The first one is a general recommendation, for example, that look a whole process that we've talked about 2 years. Like for example, General Recommendation 39, that took a long time before it was actually issued. But there's other ways of being able to create that channel communication. And for example, when your country, let's say Colombia, for example, presents a report and they see that there is a lack on attention towards women in general, then what it does is when the process is done for the evaluation of the report, they'll send a note, and this can be in 3 paragraphs, or it can be a page where the members of the committee indicate that it's important that the government can see certain proposals based on the following observations, or they can strengthen the things that are lacking right now, or take some measures around a certain topic so women can have improved access. So you give certain indications, certain recommendations specific to a country, and that's easier to be done. There's also the possibility, and you can find also in the website as well. Once you go to the Cedaw tab, where you can send cases in particular. For example, here in Guatemala, I forgot the year. I think probably 2018, 2015. I don't know. I don't recall right now. The government was in charge of some girls who were under the custody of the government, and they were burned. And there, what happened was a letter was made that although it wasn't still the time to send the reporting, but they were studying what was happening because there's reports happen every 4 year. So what's happening to the girls? And then we sent a letter directly to the committee, and the committee was in charge of looking at this specific situation. So that's something that can also happen. Once you can find in the website for the United Nations, and it's going directly into the Cedaw tab. And these are the two ways in which we are able to try to create that incidence on a specific topic. So you can send the reports that are done every 4 years, or you can have communication through a letter, which is more specific. And there you can also have that email for the Cedaw committee. And that's like the one spot, that's like the specific place channel that you can have to create that communication. And once we have that space to create that incidence, and that we know somebody is a member of the committee, then it's easier to have these discussions because we have an ally within the committee. But so this is one way to create the communication and understand as well that um, perhaps student can help me here is that this course, what this party pretends is to have the research done, a research on the vision from women and indigenous women in our own vision, and that we can also take advantage of this link that we have from Asia to Africa and Latin America, that we can do something together. I understand that this course will continue and that we can propose from our vision something that doesn't limit our that we can share, take advantage of this network that we created and what we have here to be able to to increase our voices based on our rights. I don't know if there's another comment or question that you might have. Any other comments? This recommendation that took so long, how much resistance was there to emphasize this thing with indigenous girls and with something so legal and international? And then they organize the strength from that vision that they have. So I think that that's one of the challenges that we see with the legal system and all the science that goes there. So when we started talking about this from this our origin countries, the origin towns, it's also to ask why did it take 9 years? I mean, how hard was it? What were the challenges? Thank you, Lorena. Yeah, Letty is here already, and she's a member of the collective Pub. Just to as a comment, a general comment, what Lorena is mentioning is something that's very important. It's important to remember this United Nations is a blank space, a white space, and it's just like that is. That's what it is. It is what it is. Like I mentioned um, a few moments ago, it is important to do that incidence of being able to say to the states, here we are, here are the indigenous women, and we need we don't need to have the custody, but we do need that the governments to respect that what we are. So in that sense, it is important that we are able to have those recommendations done, these recommendations. And United Nations was an international community. It's just like the you, and they can invite the governments and create the recommendations. And the incidents that we're going to have here internally or in this organization, international organizations, it's important because we can then, if we have the government of Guatemala and speak and tells us what they're doing for us, but perhaps we don't have that incidence or that strength to ask for that backup. So that's why we have these spaces, these international spaces. A lot of difficulties were found along the way. Just to share with you, some of the barriers that we had, we don't speak English, and that from there is a first barrier that we had. Unfortunately, these spaces, these international spaces, the language that is handled over there is English, and we weren't able to. And we had other needs because we can talk about Indigenous women right now because we have other needs to speak of.
And they would tell us it's not necessary to have a recommendation for Indigenous women because we're already preparing the one for rural women. And then with that, we also had a very strong challenge because we also wanted to value that we already had. So how are we going to do that fusion or reach that negotiation with the committee? So it was kind of dealing with those difficulties that we found. We are going to listen to Nukila and then we could listen to Leti so that she can also share with us her ideas and maybe generate other questions based off of that. Nukila, you have the floor.
Thank you. Sarah, thank you for your presentation. Uh, I just wondering what is the discussion right now, recently, regarding the issues on the self-identification for the Indigenous people, and also the issue of the recognition of the Indigenous people. Why I raise this question? Because if there is no recognition and then there is no space for self-identification, it will impact to the women rights, particularly Indigenous women. We cannot own our land because the certificate should be, by the state. We need to register it. We need to follow the administrative law, the state law, which is we're not recognized about the state law in our Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous wisdom. We own that collectively, we don't own this, but own by one by, I don't know the legal system in other country, but the state law is so individualistic. So for instance, for one of the family will be only own one certificate of land under the name of the man, the father. So if our father died or our husband died, there is no legal entity to us. We don't have the right to land. That's the problem. If we don't have this kind of recognition, this is civil rights, but it never been discussed in the forum of international forum. So I would like to raise about this issue because this issue is interlinked with other issues. Thank you. That's only my question.
Thank you, Nukila. there are all the situation of access to land and territory. I think those are two different questions. The access to territory and land has always been denied to us as as Indigenous women, but at a greater level for Indigenous women. The fact that we don't have that title, or when we are able to have that small access, it goes directly to the husband, the brother, the father, those lands. And it's something that unfortunately happens in the different territories, and I understand that it also happens in other continents. In regards to the Cedaw and recommendation 39 makes an emphasis on that access to land. However, maybe we need right now to open up who we're referring to when we talk about access to land, because maybe some people see it from the perspective of private property, maybe we see it more from a collective property perspective. How are we seeing this? And what better than for it to come, that proposal to come from Indigenous women to open that vision that the Cedaw proposes and that this general recommendation proposes as well. Also, there's that need to be identified, and we know that there's a lot of analysis also behind that as to why some people could be Indigenous, but they're not identified as such, or they don't identify themselves as such, or maybe just the concept of being Indigenous creates noise in people. They don't feel like they belong with their way of identifying themselves. And so there's a debate as to, are they originary peoples, are they Indigenous peoples? So I think we also need to continue analyzing and reinforcing what we want or how we want to identify. But for these situations, we need to reinforce the topic of statistics. How many are we? Also, according to, or what we've understood and what we have researched during writing this general recommendation 39, is that there are 90 countries with Indigenous people. That's the statistic that exists. But we think that we have more people, more countries where we have Indigenous communities or originary communities, but that unfortunately some states and governments don't recognize them yet. And while we don't have that recognition, they're not going to appear in a statistic as such. And if there is any kind of issues in the statistics of our country, there is a very important lack of information at a global level. And that also means that we need to propose these statistics from our own way, our own point of view, how we identify, and we need to continue proposing issues that are and topics that we need to address. So I think that it's very important what Nukila was mentioning about access to land. And yes, unfortunately, there's this whole issue of extractivism, which has also hurt our territories very much and has made the Indigenous communities move, and it has taken their or our Indigenous land where we are connected. Something else that we found when we were proposing the general recommendation, that for most or for many or the most Indigenous communities, land is very important. That first link that we have is to our land. But we also had the challenge for other women that for them it might not be the most important aspect. And we have women who lived on ice, and they would migrate. Once that melted, they look for a safer space. So we also there have a challenge how Indigenous women find points in common to create and build something. So I'm going to leave it there. We have other hands raised. Nailehi, I don't know if I said it correctly. We have her.
Yeah, you can just say Nai. First of all, I just want to take time to recognize that there are a number of efforts that we Indigenous people are working on, especially in areas where recognition is minimal and also not recognized at all. And I just concur with Nukila on what she has just said. Actually, we have very good international recommendation, laws, and others that foresee the need of the Indigenous people to be recognized, but they highly collide with the national laws, because you find in states like where I come from, we are highly condemned as Indigenous people and not even recognized at all. And most of the time, our identity is highly, I can say it's tarnished in a bad way, because our identity are used only for the sake of the state benefit. And here we see women, children, even elderly are involved. For instance, I am a Maasai, but in different tourism attraction and others, you find women, their portrait, their picture, their culture, and but in this other ratification and recommendation that are there internationally, the state is openly ratifying it, giving door to them. But when you come back home now, it's totally not seen there. Currently, we are facing a very huge problem where I come from, where it's Ngorongoro, people being relocated from their land to other areas. But at the same time, you find the international organs like the UNESCO and others, who are the one to hold the heritage of this Indigenous community, are also part of that, because they come with recommendations, good reports, and at the end of the day, these condemned Indigenous people. So what I need to suggest, and something all of us as Indigenous women, this is an effortless for us to live, but we need to continue fighting for it. Because at the end of the day, we are some of the people that got this opportunity. And I thank you, teacher, because you have raised a very good thing that despite that we are saying about the Indigenous people, we also need to diversify and see even the role of women than others, but also to understand this, that where we highly come from, what we need structurally to put together as Indigenous women is not only the term of recognition, but like we find there are a number of Indigenous organizations that we have. For instance, in my country, we have them, but how many of them really work in terms of the Indigenous people? That's another issue that we need to tackle on that. But how many of them are led by these Indigenous women? But how many of them are openly recognize the right of the Indigenous women and even women at large? So we still have around time to go on. So I concur with you that this is not only going to end here, but is always fighting for it, and see the territorial boundaries that is brought by the colonial system. It's not even from us. They are just brought by the colonial system. Where I come from is close to Kenya, and how I speak with the Kenyan women or the Maasai from there is the same. But the boundary has created a huge territorial conflict between my culture, which is the same with the people of Kenya, to being seen not to belong to that place. So this is something keeping on going. But as an Indigenous woman, and this recommendation that we see, it's high time to openly say that even this international organization and organs sometimes are paving ways to continue diminishing the indigenous communities in different aspects. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, sister, for that reflection. And yes, we do also need to continue speaking of that diversity that we are as women in the world. We also, when we were trying to bring this general recommendation forth, they were asking us if Black women were included or if women of diversity were included. And it was also, so this conversation was very blatant, which we tried to do. We tried for this general recommendation to be very open and very broad so that we were able to include the differences of women. But without a doubt, for Black women, the situation is even stronger, and because they live that racism and that discrimination much stronger. And what best if we can propose a recommendation directly for Black women, because in the end, some Black women do identify as Indigenous women, but others don't. So we also need to talk about that, which is our identity. How do we identify? And that is going to come from the women who are organized, like the sister was mentioning. Unfortunately, if a woman is not organized, they probably have very little knowledge of their rights. And then there's also that challenge of women who know a little bit more or who had different access to information, so that from us we can transmit or bring to a different level what we are living, that we can communicate what we're living at different levels. And usually governments have used Black women, Indigenous women, and poor women as a tourist attraction or a folklorization from their own way of thinking. And unfortunately, that has happened a lot, because it seems that in our countries, if they put our picture as an Indigenous woman with our dress and whatnot, it's only going to serve to attract tourists, for example, or how they're taking advantage of, but not providing that respect to our rights. They don't see us as people, as political beings who have who have a way of acting, who have a different way of life. And that also is political, but they don't see us that way. And I think that happens in the different territories. I saw another raised hand, and if not, we can go with Letty. Leticia Tai is a member of the Ishpop collective. She is also an Indigenous woman of Guatemala. She's currently working with an organization called the Association Maya Ukushbe, which is an association that is a part of the Ishpop collective. And today she's going to share a little bit about what are the timeline, what was the achievement that we had, what are the challenges that we lived during the approval of this general recommendation, but also what is being done after that approval. Because you would think that everything just sort of stays in that area of being approved, which is great, but there are other actions that need to happen aside from that approval. And so I leave the space, I leave the floor to Letty so that she can share with us, and then we can kind of go to a session of questions and answers. Welcome, Letty. Good morning. Thank you, Sarah. Greetings to all of you that are here with us today. Well, it's a pleasure for me to share this space, this virtual space, with each one of you. From the Ishpub Collective, it has been very important to really work on this general recommendation. We know that it's been a long process, but it's also been an achievement for Indigenous women. But this is due to what you have shared, that we need to be organized and to participate, but also that look that we gave the general recommendation. We were making that analysis and we were sharing it with women if we felt identified mainly with the convention of the Cedaw as Indigenous women or not. And that's where we realized that women also have that lack of knowledge of what the Cedaw really is. So I think we also go from there, because as you have mentioned in your countries, in your countries you have a great amount of laws that are very well drafted, but in the practice, they are not known in the communities that they serve. They don't know of all these instruments that they have. So the first thing that we wanted to achieve as an Ishpub collective was to have our first actions, mainly what is to us as Indigenous women, the Cedaw, what it's for, and why it's important to have these general recommendations, because we also need to understand what it was going to be used for that we already have, this general recommendation that we already have. And in Guatemala, from 2018, we started with this road that to be able to share with women the importance, because as Indigenous women, we know that we specifically have other rights that are violated, like our identity as women. As women, we wear our Mayan clothes, and from there, we have that violence towards women, especially girls in schools. They're still being prohibited to wear their Mayan clothing, even though there are some rights in the judicial instruments and laws that recognize that, but that's not being respected. So we were doing these reflections, analyze different subjects, and in 2019, we did our first public consult, where we broached different subjects, mainly racism, discrimination that we live in the different spaces as Indigenous women, but also that topic that you were mentioning of territory, Mother Earth, and how we see it from an Indigenous people's perspective. We also had that analysis, but we also know that all that analysis that we had with women of different regions here in our country, we know that not all those ideas were written or were left in this recommendation, because we know that this recommendation has brought a lot of recommendations from other women. So we kind of have in process to add all the different communities and their concerns, and we have a long way to achieve for general recommendation to be known. And we do dialogues with our peoples and our women. Those of you that are in the spaces, we know that there are laws, we know that they are not being complied with, but women from the communities, they don't have that information. So that's why we are trying to find a way to do virtual dialogues, also different meetings and conventions with women of different communities that are here in Guatemala, but not only in Guatemala, but at an international level. We try to articulate with other organizations to make our work known, and why we talk about general recommendation, because as we were commenting, we were questioning, why did we want another recommendation if we already had others that mentioned Indigenous women or Indigenous as a whole? But we said that this instrument was going to be important because it was going to specify even more that violence that we live, mainly the criminalization that women who are defending the territory live, women who have fought constantly for the conservation of natural property that companies are violating. So I think there are very important points. And this process, that's why we wanted to bring it to different women. And we also share in other regions to bring this information forth. And in the way, there's been an interest of other women because they have come together with us because they realized that this initiative was important. And that's why we considered that through this process, it has been very important because that way we can bring this work. We know that it's not easy to ask for a recommendation to exist, but it's also a fight that women are carrying out, that we know that only through that organization, through the creation of recommendations, but also through coming together as organizations and empowering women is going to be the only way that for Indigenous women rights to be respected. When we talk about education and how important it is, we see it from a perspective of having to educate women. We have done these actions with women, and these spaces have allowed us, like today, have allowed us to continue making public this collective work that we are doing, but also moving forth from the context that each community where women live, and coming from those realities also allows us to know other points in common or other points of view. And when we come from these spaces, we know that the borders are not a limitation, but that instead this is also going to allow us to continue articulating and coming together more, because having those alliances with other women is going to also allow us to continue strengthening these capabilities that each woman has. And as we were saying, this was a job that was very broad and of many years, and took place over many years. And we can say now that we have the General Recommendation 39, what is going to happen now? We were told in the different actions that once the recommendation is done, what happens? Does it just stay there? But as the Ishpub Collective, we see the importance of continue making this material known. For us, the first point that we marked to continue is not that this recommendation stays there as approved, so that and then everybody else can figure out what to do. No, we were trying to figure out how we can mediate this recommendation, because we know that the words that are there, women might not understand them, because even from the language of women, each one is diverse in their communities because each one has a different language. So we also, from a first point of importance, we have to do this mediation so that it's more accessible, more understandable to girls and women. So currently we have teachings, and it's the beginning of this work that we are carrying out. So this is important to be able to continue spreading the word and continue saying that this effort was not a one-year effort, but that it has been fought for many years. And a lot of women from different countries of the world came together, and that that it contains important contributions from women who will fight throughout their life and throughout the years to have better conditions. And this tool that we have is for the different organizations who build process of education for women and why it's important to continue empowering women, because we know that there's a lot of women who continue to not be aware of their rights and what Cedaw is. They don't know several situations. So as women who are organized, who are within these spaces, we have this work to continue working in the different sectors. We know that there's a lot of challenges. We know that the state is not going to solve all the issues that we have as Indigenous communities or Indigenous women. So it is our responsibility as a collective, as organizations, to come together, continue coming together, continue joining forces each time more, so that they know that we do exist, we are here, and that we have that right to defend mainly our identity as women. And hence, currently, we also have continue working how else we can come together with other organizations to reach other territories with this important information of the general recommendation. And those are the challenges that we have to face. But as I was mentioning, we're all diverse and we're all speaking different languages. And so it's important to translate in other languages this material, because I feel like it's essential to continue working with the different women. Sorry. Thank you, Letty, for sharing with us all this that has represented, that this recommendation has represented. We're going to leave some time for comments or questions on what this initiative is, or what your takes are. Also, what we were talking about a few days ago, that this is the first recommendation, general recommendation, that is born from the civil society. So that we can maybe take advantage of that space with the collective to ask any questions, any comments related to that.
Daisy?
No se escucha.
Daisy, I think you're in mute. Can you check if you're in mute, please? We can't listen to you. We can't listen to you.
Can you hear me now?
Now, yes, yes. Just a little louder.
Okay,
Speak a
thank
little
you.
louder.
So mine was a comment, not a question. It's something that she said that has really excited me. About translating the recommendation into other languages. I think that's going to be really nice, because that's how our mothers are going to understand the recommendation so well. They're going to get to know their rights and all that, because if we give it to them in English or in Spanish or all that, it's going to be a bit difficult. But when we put it into our indigenous languages, when we read to them in our own languages, it's going to create some more impact. So that's what excited me. Thank you.
Yes, Daisy, thank you very much. I feel that it is very important to bring this document to other languages, because English is in fact in the platform for the United Nations in Cedaw. You see this recommendation in English and Spanish. I'm not sure if it's another other language, means to French, which are like the main languages that the United Nations uses. That we're trying to make that sort to the look here in Guatemala to try and bring this into the local languages. And we're trying to, it's hard, but Pacachique, which are the local languages that we have here, we translate these documents into those languages. The general recommendation for those is this is for Indigenous women. Therefore, it needs to be translated to these languages. So it's also important to do this. And we do those limitations, we find those limitations to find the vocalizations and we say, for example, we have to demand those to the government because they are the ones who need to be presenting these documents into the different languages so that we can all understand them. And we understand that this is something that will never happen. So this is why the other organizations are getting together and doing this type of work. Prior to the issuance of this recommendation, we made a podcast in which we spoke about what this recommendation means, what it was going to work for, and how to do it in the local languages. Also to share with you that we're doing alliances with radios, with local radios and local organizations so that we can still communicate those recommendations. Something that we were doing with Letty. Part of this experience was that when we started talking about where we were talking about the government with agreement 169 of consultations, community consultations. I think that it's important for them to have the spaces, and this allows us to change and modifying based on the dialogues with women to be able to talk about our needs. So how can we create strategies to reach everyone and reach our objectives? Is there another comment or observation that somebody might have? Any questions that somebody will make? Also to share with you, based on this process, to allow this story communication to happen, I think that it was important to have intergenerational participation. And that's why we're including girls. They have rights and they're able and they need to share this way of work because they've also suffered. And it's part of the exercise that we did with them. Meetings with girls and also in general with the participation of them because they complement their opinions of the adults. And this is the objective, right? Not only women, not only men, but also boys and girls being able to share in the General Assemblies because it's an instrument that is very important for us. And when we're mentioning about the agreement 169, we speak with agreement 169. We talk about certain types of towns, but not specifically about the indigenous women. But this is just a complement of what is being done to strengthen. When we talk about the recommendations, it's important to talk about this convention as well, that complements all the work that's being done to talk about our rights and being able to continue to defending from the different spaces that we might have. I think somebody raised their hands. Jenlin? Thank you. I have a lot of questions here. In many of our territories, the patriarchy does what's necessary to preserve the position of power or privilege. And in many of these territories, this is seen in a bad way when we talk about they have organizations or the schools trying to talk about these rights that indigenous women have and the women have. And we spoke about this in other sessions. They want to keep on pushing down on us to keep us silent so that they can have that, take advantage of us, of their position, and take advantage of their position of power. And my doubt here is, in this path that you've had, when you talk about this general recommendations, have you had difficulties or problems with certain groups, certain institutions? Have you had them? And if you had, how have you worked around them? And also, once you start doing this process, have these discussions, how have women received it? And how have indigenous women received it? Of getting to know about the convention and its recommendations as well. And talk about community radios. Because in our territory, this have a very important town, a very important power as indigenous towns. So many times they have, well, so far, I'll stop right there. When you're coming in the cat, as you walk along, you're gonna find many difficulties. The work that needs to be done has been done with listening among each other. And the work that we've had it's been taking many years to actually get somewhere. And we've had a lot of inconveniences along the way. But when we talk about these difficulties, it's not so more with women, but when Guatemala, for example, when we started from 2012, yeah. We started in 2012 with different organizations. And along the way, many started working different paths and started working different spaces as a collective spot. We started including when we started, like we mentioned, right? Many women we didn't know about this, especially Cedaw. And when we started our first activity, trying to mention as I mentioned at the beginning, it was just in other consultations that we had, we talk about all realities. And like Sarah mentioned, for example, to have a consultation with the indigenous people, to have them participate and have the whole community participate, and not only determine population. So when we did that analysis, it was, this is something we need to reflect on. How are we doing? Are we doing it right? And from there, we can start having this dialogue. And we talk about the different regions in certain communities where we see that there is lack of knowledge. So that's where we needed to be beginning our work. And so I started issuing documents, and we talk about podcasts and spots in radios, and talk about the different languages. So that the most predominant ones, at least. And this information was well received by the women. When we began with the diffusion of what is a recommendation, a general recommendation, it began in 2018, 2019, 20. And from there, we have the pandemic and COVID. So we saw that our work had needed to keep going. So that was one of the main challenges that we had. And we said, okay, this is what we're happening. I want to continue doing this work. We had concerns around, but more than a concern, we felt alone because we had the COVID, which was a big limitation. And then we thank God we had the virtual spaces. And this was an impact for us in terms of information. We were able to have one specific spot to show them. And this allowed us for the collective, to the communities, was able to reach the information to them in different spaces. And the dialogues that we were doing virtually were recorded in different platforms. So this allowed us to reach to more people, to reach more women, and to have more interest on them by them to learn, to continue learning. The first material that we did was 10 reasons to use Cedaw. Alda Faz is the author of this document. And this was also issued through different women in different organizations. And this was also requested to have this material because it was a material that was prepared by women, for women, with different organizations that work, from women that work with women. And we understand that when we reach the communities, we can't just go and tell them with patriarchy, we need to fight against the patriarchy. So we're sharing we can't go to women and tell them, you have to defend yourself. You can't talk about it in that sense. You have to be able to start issuing information, and depending on the context as well. And that's how we're gonna be approaching certain people. So it's a dialogue, and we're gonna be looking at, as an organization, how to talk in the different communities. And it's a step that we're taking little by little based on these materials. Like you mentioned, the media communications, mainly in the communities, the alternative media that we have there in the communities. were important to be able to transmit information. So this has helped us a lot in the communities. The organizations that make up each spot has the diversity. In my organization, for example, we have a space of communication where we have radio programs, and this allows us to use these spaces and reach more people. And therefore, we see this as an accomplishment because we see the interest of the women and the girls to continue learning more, especially about the process of our general recommendations. We talk about the timeline, of course, but we talk about the process and the actions that were taken to actually reach this goal. And that this big accomplishment was done because of the contributions that were made by the women and the material that we have. We've also shared it with women, like we mentioned, the podcast as well. It's important to highlight because we talk about different constant things, and we continually on the issues that we keep living, and people get to know more about our communities, about the laws, and get empowered around the rights that they have, and participating more in the different activities to fight for the rights. We know that it's not going to be easy. We know that there's always going to be many situations that come along that as Indigenous women we're going to face. Nonetheless, through the organizations, we're going to continue questioning and seeing what things can be changed. And we know what the changes can be made. It won't be easy, but what we have, what little we can change, is going to create impact in the different spaces that we have allowed ourselves to participate. And we got to keep ourselves getting involved. And this is important because the work that we do, we try to talk with the different women, and the materials is not for us. We want to share with all the women. It's for all women so that everyone has information at hand. Jenny, and you wanted to participate? Thank you, Letty, for the information that you shared and your experience. My question is more along the lines of what our peer was mentioning. So for us, what has been the most challenging things that as a collector you have to go through to see these recommendations be approved and in terms of what is the rights for the indigenous women? So what are the main things that you have to done to make sure that there has an effect and that it can be applied to the women? I think that something very important is, like I mentioned already, we want to get to know, want the information get to know so the women get empowered around it. We have women need to have clarity on what are the violations to our rights that have been happening. So we need to find allies to say, I mean, we need to have those referrals that are going to help us get this recommendations happen. We we know that there's been many years for it to happen, a lot of fighting to actually make the struggle for actually to get it happen, to have this international increment. So now we got to continue fighting, getting those allies. for this to fight for the defenders' right of the Indigenous women. In this case, the Cedaw committee, to search with them who are our allies within the committee to actually have these rights being fulfilled in the different states. Because every time we have the presentation of these reports, the state is always gonna show the nice things, the pretty things. Nonetheless, they're not showing the impact that it has, the negative things that we have. You're gonna they're not talking with all the different women organizations, and we're still fighting to get to know more people and many different organizations that exist. So we got to continue searching and knocking on doors to look for those allies, to get follow up, and from the states also to make sure they're fulfilling these rights for us, because they have the obligation to do that for us, to defend the women's rights. Here in Guatemala, for example, and the Indigenous women, they got to get those spaces in each country as well. We have a specific instance that has to look after the women, and we have to be looking for those allies and find those articulations to make sure that we remain strong and demand that for somebody to look after those rights for us, because the laws exist. We have a lot of paper, a lot of documents with laws around them, but if we don't take empowerment of these documents and this information, it will be hard for us to demand this right to be protected for us. We have so many organizations that exist, but what are each organization doing? So we need that information to find out what's happening and and find that articulation so that we can unite forces and continue demanding the protection of our rights. So there's not just those instruments there on paper, and not only documents issued, but also protected and defended and taken to real life. I think Jaylee also wants to comment.
Thank you so much, Lacey, for this. It's very productive, and I'm highly privileged to be part of hearing this important message that you have been giving us now. But I just wanted to know, is this an activity from you, and how does other outside the borders of where you are be engaged from the Indigenous community, especially those working right from the grassroots level, where they can also be part to continue amplifying what you were explaining to us. And then because one of the questions about the alliance I wanted to ask about it and partnership, from that you already just given the clarity on it, but I wanted also to ask, because we are incoming generation every time. So how do you also in incorporating to the incoming young Indigenous women also to be part of this and be nurtured in this premises that Riam now you are as one of the people fighting for this, and how do they get in touch, especially beyond the borders that you are, because you are in Latin, others are in Africa, and others. How do you integrate all this in order to bring all the voices at once? But the main issue, is this ongoing or it's already exists? Thank you.
I feel that something that's very important is that we have more generations coming in, and this virtual spaces has been a big contribution, because like I mentioned, the different actions that we've had are always recorded and in high quality. Even the materials that we have is for all the public, and like you mentioned, all the generations. We're trying to involve more people. And like you mentioned, now that we had the general recommendation, we know that the limitation that we had has to be the economic part. We don't have enough funding. The organizations that are part of the collective, as a collective spot, it's an honors work. It's our time that we're giving to the collective. Nonetheless, we're betting on ourselves to create that awareness in different situations. And because of these reasons, we've been able to have materials that are not only for the adult women, but also for girls and the youth. And that's always been our perspective, to have the children and youth involved, because in the end, they are the ones who are going to continue defending their rights, our rights, and that it's been that part for us. When we talk about participation, we talk about of everyone, and the materials that we have, and then we're sharing. Well, the revelation we had is, it is important to have this material. It's for all levels, so that it can be understandable at all levels. When we talk about the children, what are their rights at the different ages? And currently, we're talking about, with the modernity, with modern life right now, we found, because of this, we have lack of knowledge because of this, and the different fights that we've had, and racism, and that has occurred. We're gonna continue to fight for our identity and our rights. So we're starting from that point of view, from that idea, that we as women, Indigenous women, where are we going? So those are kind of the motivations that we've had. But yes, I think we have similar issues. The women that participate with their girls. So we're seeing that they will see the participation when women bring their children with them from the children's from the different spaces that we create. So what's left is to continue working. We're looking at different actions that can be taken to continue giving to know the knowledge of this. You can visit our website, from our Facebook as well. And there we have documents already checked for them for different campaigns that we've done that have been important to continue to give more knowledge and have all the information be available to everyone. And we have the participation with girls in those documents. And there's a material there for people to check out, and this can be used. So this also, if you need materials as well, you can also go into the Facebook page, and even through email, we can send that information for you to use. And that even it can also be translated to other languages. We've done this. It's in 22 languages that we have. And I'm sorry, we've done it in 4 languages out of the 22 that we have. So it's important to know that we have this in all the languages available. So it's not something that is done from one day to another, because it also contributes to the work that we're doing along the lines.
Thank you so much, sisters, for sharing with us this, and also your main comments that this is always helping us to continue spreading this general recommendation, spreading the message of a general recommendation. Also, what we want is that more women know about it, more women can take ownership of it, and that more Indigenous women can defend our rights, which is the main objective, that we can use it. And I understand that we have no more questions or comments. So we thank Leti so much for sharing this space with us and about her own experience that the collective has had. It's made up of 4 organizations. We have ICAT, we have Jazz Mesoamerica. I know that some of you know Jazz, which is an organization that has an international reach. We also have Ticnao. We also have some sisters from Canada, which is the Institute of the Rights of Canadian Women, which are the ones who pushed for this general recommendation. And we also leave there the webpage so that you can check this content and these materials. With Dunin, we share this as well so that you can have it from Moodle. You can have it on Moodle and you can download it there, download that information there that we have on the general recommendation that has been popularized or mediated, where we use the language that's a little bit more appropriate for our reality, because sometimes these international tools have a vocabulary that's not so easy to understand. The idea is to be able to make this information more accessible. We're going to go to a break for 10 minutes and then we will come back. Thank you for being here, and we'll see each other in 10 minutes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Leti. Thank you, sisters. Thank you, Leti. We'll be back in 10 minutes at 8:51, 10 minutes. All right, sisters, we are back with this space. We continue with this space. Welcome. Thank you. We see you now. So this session is directly so that we can talk about General Recommendation 39. We would like to share with you directly the obligations of the states, directly why we need, or what the obligations of the states are referring to, how we can have another way to demand the respect for our rights. So I'm going to share my screen. There it is. Can you see it? Okay. So, well, the general recommendation number 39 makes a mention or mentions the obligations of the state. Here we recovered some obligations, and the main objective that this general recommendation presents is that states can make any kind of suggestions or make sure that they can collect data of the conditions that women, Indigenous women and girls live in, make that separation between gender, age, condition. Do we have women with disabilities, also organizations that are existing, and also of these institutions that are the ones that protect the rights of women and carry out studies on the rights of women. And this is kind of like one of the main observations that the committee makes for states, and so that they can make this data of Indigenous girls and women known. It's also important what is mentioned here in this general recommendation, that Indigenous peoples must have these spaces to obtain this data, and that we as Indigenous people and Indigenous women have control over this data that we obtain. So this is very important because it kind of makes that separation. There's two parts. The first one is that they generate this data, and the second is that this data is accessible to all of us, and we have control over this data. And that's very enriching, because regularly when you get this data, they're always used or misinterpreted. But the Cedaw mentions this about the importance of controlling this. So also another of the points to consider is that it reminds states that are parties that it's important to know and interpret this general recommendation in the light of other international instruments, such as the Declaration of Universal Rights, the existing declarations, for example, the one of Convention 169, and other instruments that have already been created, or even those that the committee themselves have generated. In this case, because it's recommendation 39, that means that there are 38 recommendations before this one, so that this recommendation can be interpreted in the light of these other existing instruments. It's also important to emphasize that there's an institution that there are institutions that provide these guarantees on collective and individual rights in each of the countries or in each of these continents. However, in a lot of cases, these lose their sense or their focus, and they also lose their objective. And hence, these general recommendation also makes a call to that reminder that these institutions created for the rights of women, for the particular rights of Indigenous women, so that they can continue strengthening that focus that they have. Also, it's important to mention on the rights of girls, and this mentions it, and also how we can use the convention, the Children's Convention, which is a very large convention that has been created by United Nations, and that we can continue strengthening with this. Also, well, in this regarding, this reminds us the obligations of the states that are party. And let's remember that the Cedaw speaks in their Article 2 to 5 about the obligation of the states. So also here we can start doing that comparison. What does the Cedaw say in these 5 articles, or 4 or 5 articles, that tells us about the obligations of the state and how we can read it based off of this general recommendation, and not just this general recommendation, but also recommendation 38. Also, let's remember that the Cedaw always talks to us about non-discrimination, talks to us about equality and substantial equality. In this case, we've also had to do emphasis on this, and that we need to reach equality. Why does the general recommendation come about? And it's because there is a void to be able to reach that equality. So the important objective is to create these conditions so that we can reach equality, really. And also, when we have another international instrument, what we want is that we can evaluate the states from these instruments created. For example, right now we can already evaluate the state of Guatemala, Colombia, and Kenya and say, okay, state, what are you doing in regards to the rights of girls and Indigenous women? Of Indigenous girls and women, something that before we couldn't ask because there was no document that before stated what are the ways to evaluate this. For example, recommendation 39 talks to us about the access to water or the conservation of native seeds. So the committee can ask, okay, Colombia, what are you doing to save native seeds? Or what are you doing to talk about, for example, the access to land? Okay, state of Kenya, what are you doing to guarantee the access to education with a cultural pertinence for Indigenous girls? Meaning that we have a framework or a fan of rights that are specific for Indigenous women and for which the state must respond for. And when they talk to us about this equality, we need then to make that interpretation. How can we reach that substantial equality or substantive equality that we talked about and that is spoken directly about in article number 1 of the Cedaw? And also how when we do this evaluation on the recommendation 39 or even all of the Cedaw, that we can take into consideration others. For example, how can we reach the access to equality and non-discrimination when an Indigenous woman is trying to access the justice system? Probably in recommendation 39, it only makes a general mention of what justice access or access of justice means to Indigenous women. But we have recommendation number 33 that talks to us directly of what women are referring to when we talk about access to justice. So we can use these two instruments to analyze what is happening in our territory and how the committee can use these two instruments to perform that evaluation. We also have recommendation number 39 that talks to us directly about how to eliminate discrimination against women. Number 28 that talks to us about that. And that way we can play with all of this that has been created to defend our rights. Currently, we are working on immigrant women that are in transit, for example, and how they live discrimination. And something that one of the members of the committee was commenting is that we are talking there, or we are going more in depth in terms of reproductive and sexual rights of women, and why there are myths for Indigenous women that are in transit. And she was saying, for example, that it seems that it's normalized, sexual violation or sexual abuse is normalized, and that they can live. And so it seems that women in transit don't have rights, and they can be used sexually, or they fall in the sexual in these rings of sexual exploitation. And how do we demand states to create spaces to protect women migrants who are in transit in their condition of immigrants? Or how the states that know that they are states of transit, or that are states of routes to other places, how can they create safe spaces for women who have their period? Because for women who are in transit, we know that at some point they have their periods, and they don't have the conditions to have a safe space and a hygienic space. And that this recommendation 40 is trying to encourage for this to be considered, something that has not discussed in all the Cedaw, all sexual and reproductive rights that are current. And these are kind of new topics that we need to pay attention to, and how the states need to create these conditions. So these recommendation 39 speaks on the access to justice in all its broad nature, and how we can make an emphasis on what women think on that access to justice. Here we also make an emphasis on how we have our own ways of Indigenous people have to solve cases or situations that happen within our communities, that there are other ways to make justice or to have justice. We even talk about here about that restorative justice. It's not talked about specifically because not all originary peoples of the world have their own justice system, but we do make a reference that these ways of doing things need to be respected, and how women would like to have access to their own justice systems, and how they create conditions so that women can access to justice, to Western justice as well. So we have to make an emphasis so that the states must respect their own ways of doing justice, but also create conditions within the Western justice system of the country so that women can easily access these justice spaces or justice in general. The committee itself also has the opportunity to evaluate specific cases of Indigenous women that have been discriminated or have suffered racism. For example, the case of some women from Canada that are Indigenous women that live close to a territory that is currently being exploited for its coal, and they live close to that company, the international company that is there, and hence Canada is a very vast territory and the populations are very dispersed. So when people, or women mainly, go from one space to another, women are disappearing. And this is happening for Indigenous women. The government or the state of Canada still does not have specific statistics of how many women have disappeared or how many girls have disappeared. So from this general recommendation, these women that are organized can present this that is happening in their territory to the committee of the Cedaw, and the committee of the Cedaw can come and say, okay, we can do an official visit to see what's going on in this territory. Or it can demand directly to the government of Canada on these information on these statistics. So we can say that the women can present directly cases, specific cases of which there's a discrimination or there's some racism elements, and this could be brought forth to the Cedaw much easier now that we have these general recommendations, which is not something that was limiting before, but we can say that it's way easier now, or we can even use specific articles that are presented by the general recommendation and bring them forth based on this point. So this is what we have on the obligation of the states. So we can say that now we have a tool, another tool that obligates states to give notice of what's going on in their territories on what's happening in regards to Indigenous girls and Indigenous women. And we are going to go now to group exercises. We're going to separate in 3 groups. I know that Dunan already has the groups of Asia, Africa, and Latin America ready so that we can do this exercise. And what we're going to do is we're going to add in the chat the questions that you're going to be sharing amongst yourselves in the group. But mainly, we have the idea to analyze how we can bring this recommendation to life in our territory. So the first question is, What are the main challenges that represent the implementation of recommendation 39 and Cedaw signify in our territory? What are those challenges? Is it that maybe in our governments there exists a recognition of Indigenous communities or no, of Indigenous, of originary peoples or not? What are the main challenges that this represents? The second question is, how can we from our own continent bring closer this recommendation and the Cedaw to more women, more girls? How can we bring these instruments closer to these populations? The third question is, what could be the role, the main role of the states, the party states, for the implementation of these general recommendations? Meaning, what would be the role that the states would be playing, the party states would be playing, so that this general recommendation 39 and the Cedaw would be made known? What would be the main role of these governments for the implementation of this recommendation? So these are the three questions. Now we're going to place it on the chat so you can have it. And we're going to separate in groups per continent: Asia, Africa, and Latin America. For this, we're going to have 15 minutes so that we can talk about amongst ourselves. And then after that, we come back to our main room.
Thank you, everyone. How did you do? How did the exercise go for everyone? Did you like time? You're all good. We got many ideas written down. All right, just like every time, the continent that wants to start, you're allowed to start today. Who wants to volunteer? We'll give you 3 minutes for each continent to give you your ideas. Who wants to begin? Asia, Africa, Latin America? Who wants to go first? Asia, alrighty. Nikila, you first?
Yeah. Thank you so much. On behalf of the Asia team, I would like to answer in order from number 1 to 3. The first question regarding the challenge, on the implementation of the GR39. So we have discussed in our group with Mimi and Florence and me. So the challenge will be we concluded that it will be criminal justice system versus what we call indigenous or traditional justice system, because from the two system, how we will use this state system or indigenous system. This is the first one, because the second one, the challenge is women, lack of participation of women in the process of the GR, for instance, in the this issue of the Cedaw and the implementation of Cedaw. They don't know the roots issues or the ground issues. So this is also the challenge. And so the third one, the challenge of the cultures, as we many times we are discuss about this challenge, the patriarchal culture, and then women as the subject, as the object of the development, and then the challenge of the lack of education, because women considered as the second citizen or something like that. And then the fourth one, the lack of the implementation. We have a good laws, good ratification. Every single country ratified, I think, about Cedaw. We think about Cedaw and CRC, Convention on the Rights of the Children, but lack of the implementation. This is very good on the surface, but the country do not take action regarding this Cedaw and also the general recommendation. And then this is still the first one. Okay, the first one, it's too complicated, of the system of the laws, the culture system, the social issues. So it makes a challenge to implement the GR 39. We are moved to second question: how to reach the girls and women, on the GR for the GR 39. So we need, because we consider this the GR 39 and Cedaw is a high level, it's high terminology with high language. So it need to we need to speak this GR with the daily conversation, daily communication, to speak every single our life, how to make it more mainstream in our society, for the women groups. And then to bring these issues not only to the to the our groups or community, but also to the home, from our the issue of the, for instance, like domestic violence. So we need to speak this from our home, because there are so many violence, stigmatization, and discrimination against women and girls, starting from the homes, because we have mentioned about the patriarchal culture, and then women as the second or the second in the family or something like that. And then to make it more, on the best to reach the girls and women, we need to give actual examples, real examples, and it should be contextual. And the case should be from our community, and it's always relevant. If it's not relevant, it cannot be absorbed by the girls and women. Let me give some examples. For instance, there are so many. We can start from the domestic violence, for instance. Domestic violence, father is always the symbol in the family. And then father always teach the also if they have girls and boy and then they want to continue for the school, the one of the some family who have like education, they will give priorities to the boy to go for school rather than to girls. So we need to give a contextual example regarding this GR 39. And then, so we mentioned before that we need to translate it. This is we read the GR 39, we make us dizzy, right? We need to read carefully. So we need to make it more enjoyable to read the GR 1339, so we can absorb what it means, every single clause or articles in the GR 39, and then make it be more creative, to use some, like a cartoon, an illustration, like telling the story. It's very good to translate this GR 39 to reach girls and women. Okay, we're moving to the third question, the last one. So it's about the state, the state, the key role of the state. So we concluded that the state is the duty bearers of the GR 39. So the state should have we need to put more accountability to the state. We break down what can be the key roles of the state. One is to monitor the situation of the violence, stigmatization, discriminations happen to the girls and women, and then to legislate the laws or policy to tackle the issue that we mentioned, like a discrimination, violation, etc. And then to make protection, to provide protection, and then to empower women, including indigenous women. And then next one, this is the crucial one, to ensure the implementation of the laws, policies. They rectified many covenants, but they never been. They have the state have lack of implementation and understanding, same understanding. For instance, the state from the Ministry of Social Affairs will be different with the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection, for instance, or maybe to the government sector on ombudsman or national human rights institutions. So we need to have a similar understanding regarding the GR 39, and they have to engage to strengthen civil society organization, including the women groups, to collaborate with them, to discuss with them what their needs, what their needs and their capacity as well. Do they have a lack of access? Do they have difficulty now? So it needs active involvement of the state to engage women groups. I think I would like to end my my presentation from our Asia group. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Nukila, for your presentation, for being the voice of your peers. So we're going to make this convention to be more dynamic, to, to see this and make this in a way that is more available for more people to understand it and absorb it, like you mentioned, because we need to take ownership of it as well, and that is important. We'll leave Africa, please. That's it, Daisy.
Yes. Okay. On behalf of Africa, we've had a good discussion, a very broad one. And on the first question, on the main challenges posed by the implementation of GR39 in our territory, which is Africa, one of the main challenges that we found out was admission of the IPs in countries. That's one of the main challenges because we cannot implement or we cannot put into working the GR39 when people are not recognized. A good example is Tanzania, where our friend Nai comes from. They are not recognized. So implementing this GR39 is going to be a problem. And in conjunction to that, there is a problem of identities being misused, whereby you'll find out that in some countries, also same as Tanzania, I'm just giving examples in countries that we know. An example is Tanzania, where our friend was telling us that they are only being used, their identity is being used when the country wants something, for example, in tourism and all that. You'll find out that the Maasai, the pictures of their mothers are being used, the pictures of the Maasai are being used. So that's one of the challenges. Then another challenge is some countries in Africa are signing this GR39, but they are not putting it into implementation. So there's a problem of signing, but now you're not putting it into implementation. Then another point was lack of awareness and political will in our communities and in countries, whereby even in some point that our countries or our governments could be signing, but they don't have the awareness of what is this, and there's not the political will to sign and put it into place. Then another challenge is lack of resources. We need resources to implement all these. So if we don't have resources, if the IPs were not given resources, there is no way we're going to implement because we cannot just implement it that way. We need to move to our mothers, we need to go to the communities, we need to tell them this and this and that. We need to like translate it and all that. So with no resources, it's going to be a big problem, and it has been a problem. Then on the next question on how we can bring this GR39 close to our girls and mothers, one of the main and outstanding things that our people said and agreed on is the interpretation of the GR39 into the local languages. This is one of the methodology that is going, and we saw it's going to be helpful to us. If we translate it as we had said it earlier, to, for example, the Pokot, I come from the Pokot community. My friend Nai and Esther, Vivian, if they interpret into their local languages, Fadimati is also there, it's going to be very easy. When I stand before my community and I read to them in my local language, it's going to sink in more and they're going to understand it more other than when you could read it to them in English or either Spanish or any other UN language. Then the next thing is doing workshops in local languages, that is our indigenous languages. When we go to the communities, we don't go there and do like workshops. In, for example, Swahili is a common language in Africa, in most parts of East Africa, and Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda. For example, in this context, Tanzania and Kenya, we cannot get to the community. For example, we send Nai, she gets there and trains our women in Swahili. It's not going to sink in, it's not going to come close to them as we wish to come. So the best thing is we train or we come up with workshops and we train them in the local languages. Then capacity building also falls under that.
Mm.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I don't know what happened to my speaker. I just saw someone saying you can't hear me. I'm sorry for that. So another thing is methodologies, and we were discussing on some of the methodologies that we can use. And there's our friend Esther, or was it Nai, gave us a very good example. In Africa, for example, we have gatherings whereby we have people meeting, we have community gatherings. For us in my community, communities meet after lunch, they go there, sit down and all that. We can use those moments, we can use the gatherings to tell them more about the GR39. We can also compose songs on this, which is very possible. Our people are so good in that. We can also go to schools and tell them and teach them more about this GR39. And we also had an idea whereby we can do some recording in our local languages on GR39 and do a video. We can put some interesting music of our indigenous language. Then when we get to the community, we just play it. We display it like the cinemas and all that, where the whole community is watching. So it's going to be very good to that. They're going to watch it. They're going to understand it because it's being done in their local language. Then on the last question on the role of states or parties in implementation of GR39, the first one was the states to sign and put it into implementation. As we had said earlier, that was a challenge whereby they're just signing and they're not putting it into implementation. So one thing is they sign it and they put it into implementation. The second thing is parties to develop legal framework that integrate GR39. They come up with frameworks that integrate it. That's going to be very easy for it to be implemented. Then our parties can also allocate resources in developing materials in the implementations, advocacy, and all that. If they can set aside some, after they sign, and if they can set aside some resources, that it's going to help us, IPs in our countries, to carry out the capacity building, advocacy, and all that. It's going to be a great role they shall have played. Then they develop monitoring framework to ensure its implementation. They come up with ways in which they're going to monitor, they see if the implementation is being done or not. Then the second last is they should or they ought to recognize IPs in their countries. Because now, okay, you've not recognized us, there's no way you're going to do the implementation. So if they recognize the IPs in their countries, it's going to be a big role and it's going to have helped us a lot. Then the last one was to decolonize laws that do not recognize IPs. An example is the case of Tanzania, whereby our friend told us that there are laws that are still there that do not recognize the IPs. So the best thing they can do is if they can decolonize these laws and come up with other laws that recognize IPs, it's going to play a very big role. Thank you. I don't know if I forgot something. My team can maybe add up. That's what is in a video.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. We're gonna go with the last girl, which is from Latin
So we're ready
America,
for Latin America.
without making the emphasis that we need to take the first step. They have to recognize that diversity that exists in territories to be
future
able to
guarantee
guarantee the fact that we
what
can
It's been done
bring everybody
different states.
together, and what
And this is
states
very
have
noted
done to make everybody equal in terms
for the
of
entire
like
diversity that we
who
have.
they are and where
So
they
thank
come
you
from
for sharing
has
that,
been
Jason.
very hurtful because they don't recognize
Latin
the
America, your space
differences
now.
in their ethnias. We're gonna go with Latin America.
I'm gonna comment a little bit about what was the discussion that we had here in the first question. What was the main challenges that we had for implementing in our territories? Territory, it is very important to know how we communicate in our territories on this topic about patriarchy, and also take into account that we are a community and we need to strengthen the collective space and show that there is responsibility in terms of patriarchy and male chauvinism. So there's two roles at the same time, but it's a challenge to talk about in our languages because the Cedaw has many technical words, and in our language we see that there are words in Spanish that do not translate properly to our language, for example. So how do we make it to translate it in such a way is a challenge because there's lack of words that sometimes that do not come into the context. So from your language, how can we make it so how do we put it into our territory? And it is very important to see people who can help us with in those terms to make sure that we have the proper information and see that so the patriarchy is there, but it's present everywhere. So how do we put it into general comments as well? We feel how do we take into account these recommendations and to make an emphasis on an analysis of our context on what's written through communication strategies. And it's a good example. Then we have the conversations and how do we create these strategies as well? But it's a big challenge, obviously. And it's to be interesting from the state to have these resources, to be insured by the state, to be able to socialize all the information, whether that's financial resources or human resources, but all that it's needed to make sure to reach to the end user. And it's important that we work to create different alliances with the communities, is it local institutions or the government? We need to have that synergy. And I guess it was mentioning so that it's not only for the government sector, but also education, health, and to integrate everyone into this whole communication process, so that everyone takes ownership of the information, not because we are indigenous. So the government needs to be informed, and because it's something that's very cultural, and it's something that we need to take into account. So the challenge is the weaknesses on the resources, obviously, to have the availability of resources. And the role of the state is to get them involved and make sure that there's a responsibility, that they know that it's a responsibility in the territories to make sure that this information reaches the territories. But we know that we have already in territories where it's very hard to see this as a reality and make sure that we have the mechanisms for political strategies to make sure the governments are incorporated into this to make the field of women, the feeling by women and girls, and it's something that begins as a responsibility that they should have to train the different members of their part of the government on indigenous situations. So perhaps so there wouldn't be a double work that we have to do. So we talk about the care that we mentioned from a different perspective because it's something from indigenous women, and then we're in a community, but that to create their awareness and that sensitization from the government is important, and that's from our side. Thank you. Thank you, Amai, for that important reflection intervention, because definitely we need to have that acknowledgement, not acknowledgement, but that respect for our rights when we talk about we're saying here we are, but what we need is respect to our diversity, and to our way of thinking in our territories. And it is important to have these conventions to back us up. Sorry that the time is already coming to an end, but I want to thank you we still have many things to discuss, but it's important to understand where the rights were coming from and how to have this intersectionality and how we can continue to reinforce the implementation of racism, discrimination, and how we talk about Cedaw and the Year 39 through the recommendations and coming down to Year 39, which is the last thing that we've seen. And this is what we were invaded for. And to have this idea to be able to share with you the experiences that we have. We have already left in the platforms documents for you to consult with. There are many exercises for you to see as well. Precisely for you to have information available to you. These 3 hours that we've had during the 5 days are just not enough, but at least it serves as a platform for you guys to continue going more in depth. And there's also many challenges from our point of view and from our organizations to keep sharing with you. With FIMI, we have done these alliances in the last years through this initiative, which has helped us a lot because it is a platform that, as a big platform at a local level, and it allows us to reach more people, get to know this initiative, and to talk about it, so that in the end, it can also have this presence that it can be approved. So thank you very much for the space. I did the Cedaw committee page. You can also see information over there through different languages. I can leave you my email as well, so in case you need to have any doubts that you need to discuss, we can discuss about anything that is not clear. We're always available for you. It was a pleasure to get to know you and listen to you. I know you have different contexts. So I'm so happy to be here and we're in touch. Thank you, Ms. Sara, for your teaching, for these contributions that you had, for your experiences, and the activities that we discussed here. Thank you for your leadership. And we hope that we continue working towards the incidence of women in the world, and also to be all of you to keep in mind that you got to go into Moodle, because for the next Friday, we already have a homework there. So you got to answer these questions. You can use images or graphs. And the idea is that you can add by Thursday in the forum. You answer these questions and you put them in the forum before Friday. And you put it on the forum. And with this, the FIMI team will continue to pass this to the teacher so they can be projected without any inconvenience. So please have that in mind. And we wish you a happy day and a happy week. And thank you, Sara, for her words and their energy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. We want to thank you a lot for everything you shared with us.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Many hugs. Thank you. Bye.